Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, Laura?
Okay, I'm Laura Patterson, and I am the president and co-founder of Vision Edge Marketing, which was founded in Austin, Texas in 1999. And we're essentially a strategic and product marketing company that uses data and analytics to improve marketing performance, to create marketing dashboards, understand marketing accountability, improve marketing and sales alignment, and just enable organizations to be more successful when it comes to customer acquisition, retention, and growth.
And what kind of companies do you work with, Laura?
We work with companies of all sizes, from very large companies like Elsevier, Intel, Tektronix, Adobe, big name companies such as that, to LexisNexis, to companies you've never heard of that are in early stage, just starting out. And we have a pretty comprehensive list of customers on our website if people are curious to know more.
Great. So you work with both large organizations as well as startups or mid-sized companies.
Exactly, Nick. Predominantly, I would say our customers are what you would call B2B. So they are selling to other businesses as opposed to B2C, selling to consumers.
Excellent. And Ian, what about you?
I'm Ian Oxman. I am CMO partner with Chief Outsiders. We are a executive consultancy, marketing consultancy, working with small and mid-sized growth companies. We are a little bit different than most consulting firms because we work as fractional CMOs. So we come into companies that need a little bit of senior executive leadership to get them over the hump to the next phase of growth.
Wonderful, and thank you both for joining me today. I want to start off with telling my favorite story, which I found to be very effective in communicating certain ideas. And this is a folklore from India, which says 10 blind men and an elephant. I don't know if anyone has, either of you have heard of it. It's basically that these 10 guys had never seen, heard, or known of an elephant, and when they were first introduced to an elephant, being blind, they had to touch, and one guy got hold of the leg, the other guy gets hold of the tail, and the third person, the girl, holds off the trunk, and so on and so forth. And they all have a different perspective of what an elephant is. It's a rope or a pillar or a wall, and so on and so forth. And to some extent, in my mind, marketing is such a multidimensional concept, a construct, that almost everybody has a slightly different and indeed skewed perspective of what it is. And that's why there is a lot of disconnect in my mind between the tower dwellers and the troops in the dungeon. And that disconnect causes a lot of performance issues within marketing. So what I wanted to get at, asking you both, is an understanding of what exactly is the main, if we were to be able to say that, main goal of marketing. And I will take a hypothesis and then put it in front of you and ask you what you think. Some people that I've talked with, and I also agree with that concept, that the main purpose of marketing in any organization is demand generation. Would you agree or disagree with that assertion, Laura?
I would say that that's part of it. That's only one part of marketing. So a classic way to think about marketing is that our job is to help find, which is the demand gen, find customers, but we're also responsible for keeping customers and growing the value of those customers. And we have a number of parts of marketing associated with all of that. So demand gen is typically a form of outbound marketing, which might be a part of marketing communications. But there's strategic marketing, there's product marketing, there's field marketing, and within that, of marketing. So the marketing workflow is actually rather extensive and it's way beyond, much more comprehensive than just demand gen. That's our point of view.
What about you, Ian? Do you agree with Laura? Do you think demand gen is the primary goal, or it's one of the other many other goals?
Well, I agree. I agree that demand gen is an important goal, but it's not the complete picture of marketing. I mean, what marketing is, from my perspective, it's all about developing and communicating the value proposition of the company. And that developing part is or can be around identifying the markets, identifying the product needs. Marketing plays a huge role in that. Communicating that value proposition can take a whole lot of forms, and it should end up with demand generation and driving revenue. But just looking at demand gen as being marketing, I think is too narrow a focus.
And there are lots of people who would have an issue with that, and I know of such people, because what happens is when we take an ethnocentric view of our own work as marketers and say, no, wait, marketing is big. It's the glue that holds the entire company together. It's the function that defines the strategy of the corporation. It's the system that creates all the metrics to align all other functions towards the demand generation revenue goals. And some might even venture to say that, well, demand generation is not the only thing. Profitability is another thing. And marketing is integral to profitability. And so when people start taking that view, which I'm not saying is wrong, that's where the elephant emerges in terms of this complex beast. And oftentimes, instead of understanding the complexity, some leaders will simply ignore it and say, all right, let them do their own thing. They are about, social media. They're focusing on these metrics, that metrics, and let them be. I'm not going to involve into the details. It could be just an expense, as far as I'm concerned as the CEO. What do you have to say to that? The simplicity versus the complexity.
I think if I could sort of talk, I think that trying to say that marketing is the entire company is going to the other extreme. So let me share with you some information. For 10 years, we have been doing a study on marketing performance measurement and management. So we've asked a lot of CEOs in small, medium, and large-sized companies, as well as many people in marketing, to give us some insight into what they're doing around marketing measurement and marketing accountability. And one of the questions we've been asking for a decade is for the CEO to provide their assessment of their marketing organization's ability to impact and contribute to the business. And the data for the last 10 years has been pretty consistent. Not very many marketing organizations score very high. Only a few of them score a 90 or better. A lot of them score, low Bs. Many of them score in what we would call a C range if you're familiar with the ratings in America. And then we have a lot, a few, not so many right now, because these D players, due to the economy, haven't really been able to hold on to their position. So we've seen a lot fewer Ds over the last couple of years. And so we've been able to, through analysis, using statistical analysis, because we've had extensive research now, we can actually predict which marketing organizations are going to earn an A. And there's 2 or 3 key things that those A best-in-class marketers do differently than the rest of the group. And those 3 things are, first and foremost, they have much better alignment around how they're going to, what their marketing activities are going to do in terms of business results. And so that oftentimes is much more than just demand gen. The second thing is they know how to convey their value. They have the right kinds of metrics, they're accountable, they have dashboards. And the third thing is they see performance measurement and management as a part of their responsibility. Not just capturing and reporting data, like how many people came to the website, how many people are following them in social media, what kind of coverage they're getting from their press, what kind of activities are occurring on their website, like downloads or something, but actual accountability around impact to the business. Those are very unique things to the best-in-class marketers. So I think back to your question about simple versus complex, it's not about whether or not marketing encompasses the whole organization. It's about whether or not marketing is doing their job to impact the business in the way that the C-suite thinks that they ought to.
So I agree with you, and I'll ask Ian for this question. If it's not measured, it doesn't get managed. Now, it's good to say good things about all the functions that marketing performs, but at some point we have to quantify them, and we're talking about metrics, so quantification is critical. At some point we have to quantify and say this is quantifiable, that's not quantifiable, and we come to certain end results, which creates that accountability that you're talking about. So, you, Ian, work with mid-sized companies and so on and so forth. Oftentimes it's not possible to boil the entire ocean and make sure that marketing does all its functions properly, including understanding the strategic initiatives that need to be taken for future, because marketing has lagged effects oftentimes. So in your experience, is it better to limit what we do and make marketing accountable clearly to a specific set of important indicators, as opposed to, well, we need to do all the things?
Well, definitely from my experience, any company that is successful from a marketing and a revenue standpoint, it all starts with really having a clear strategic plan. And it never ceases to amaze me how many companies become successful. They get to a point where they've grown their company because they chase opportunities. And you get to a point where that's great, but you can't scale chasing opportunities. You have to then identify what's the strategy, what's the message, and then identify those tactics that, yes, metrics are a huge part of. But the one area of caution is that sometimes companies get so tied up in trying to tie metrics to marketing that rather than measuring what they do, they only do what they can measure, which really then ends up being, they do a very limited number of things that are simple because that's the easiest things they can measure. So there is a part of it where you got to step back and say, well, to generate demand, there are other activities besides getting registrations at a webinar. There are other activities that you may need to do that may be a little bit more difficult to measure, and you have to be creative about it. But I agree, maintaining those metrics is critical, because that's one of the reasons why marketing often doesn't get a seat at the table, at the executive, the board table, because operations comes with lots of detail and financials and expenses, and sales comes and they've got revenue and they've got numbers, and marketing often doesn't have anything to bring to the table, so they're kind of excluded from that highest level planning discussion.
I agree with Ian, and many companies, particularly smaller to medium-sized early stage companies, are very opportunistic in their approach to the market. And eventually we do need to be more strategic, and many marketers don't even understand what strategy is, because when we ask them what's your strategy, they'll say it's PR or social media or whatever, and those are not strategies. They don't even understand what strategy is. But moving away from that and keeping to the topic of marketing accountability and marketing measurement, there's way more to measurement than, well, oftentimes people talk about ROI, for example. That's only one potential metric. So let's just step back for a moment and think about what's important to these small to medium-sized companies and how that might play out in terms of metrics for marketing. Because to Ian's point, many marketers do take the line of least resistance when it comes to measurement, and whatever they can easily measure is what they do measure, and that may not be the right thing, because again, what the C-suite wants is to be able to see that link between what marketing is doing and business results. So just telling people just saying how many people came to the website or registered for a webinar or whatever doesn't make that link for them. So all organizations want to drive a few things. When you sit around the water cooler or the coffee pot with the C-suite, they're all paying attention to what's their market share look like. How are they growing their customer base or their customer value? What impact are they having in terms of rate of customer acquisition? How are they affecting preference, improving preference for their company and its products? Right? Those are things they all care about. Are their customers loyal? So those are all things that marketing should be able to impact and show that they're making a difference. And the reason marketers typically struggle is A, they don't have any processes in place, right? So even if they have some tools, they have no processes. They struggle with data because they don't oftentimes have the tools for the data. They struggle because they haven't set the right kinds of performance targets. I can't tell you how many marketing plans, Nick, I see every week They have like no performance targets, very broad brushstroke things like increase awareness, right? That's one you see it all the time. Increase awareness, right? Even if you see grow market share. I mean, these are big broad brushstroke things. How do you know if you've been successful? They have no performance targets.
In a certain sense, Laura and Ian, what both of you are saying is that there is a missing roadmap, so to speak, where you can clearly demonstrate linkages, activities, results, and say, look, this is what we are trying to do, this is what we have gotten done for the organization. And that would create this sense of accountability. And oftentimes marketers are not creating that roadmap, they're simply doing their activities. And that's why the board or the CEO or the executive committee is not giving you enough attention. And I hear that. The other element of it is that there's those things that can be measured in the metrics, and the other is the strategic, where maybe metrics is not the right way to measure it, but you need to have an into the strategy planning sessions, which sometimes the CMOs are involved, and oftentimes they are neglected, and primarily because you're encroaching upon the CEO's territory. So those two separate things. How can company and CMOs bridge that gap, given that we know that the average tenure of a CMO is perhaps half of that of the CFO, and before they can do anything, they're out and somebody else is in. So given that scenario, how can they actually bridge that gap between the metrics and the strategic, where you can create greater value for the organization as a group?
I think one step to it is really identifying what are the real key metrics within a company, and then figuring out how marketing then impacts those metrics. So it's taking a step back from marketing and saying marketing is not for marketing's sake. It's not just about our metrics. It's about the other key metrics of the business and how we connect. So let's say, for example, in sales, if you're in a B2B company, it's all about pipeline. So how does marketing affect the pipeline? How does it affect not only the number of opportunities that are coming into the pipeline, but how does it maybe shorten the length of time, the time to close? The issues that are critical to the sales leader, those are the issues that the marketing leader needs to key in on and figure out how he gets metrics that are in alignment. Otherwise, as Laura says, it's just a marketer talking about brand awareness, which no one else at the table really cares about.
We have a methodology. I'm sure we're not the only ones. Ours is actually a patent pending mapping methodology, which actually does bridge that gap, so that the CMO needs to own that process. And it shows the connection from activities to strategy to business results. And it serves as the data chains that you will need in order to build out your metrics. So if we were to build off of Ian's example of pipeline, right, besides looking at the number of opportunities and the impact on the sales cycle, we could be looking at what is the win-loss ratio of marketing generated opportunities, and how do those compare, for example, to non-generated marketing opportunities. That's another very interesting metric if you want to look at it beyond just presenting leads, because just presenting qualified leads is one thing, and of course we all know that what a qualified lead is depends on the definition, and how every company might be different. Many companies define that by their own internal sales process as opposed to the customer buying process. So that's something that oftentimes needs to be addressed. But if you go back to, for example, another type of metric, which might be if you're looking to reduce cost of sale, or you're looking to expand your footprint inside a customer base, for example, you might use referral rate and how marketing is affecting the referral rate in terms of a metric. And that might have something to do with those customers' sentiment towards your company. A lot of people say, look, I'm looking at, I don't have a lot of money to do this NPS scoring or this advocacy scoring because we're a small to medium-sized company. But you can create a way to understand sentiment. Like, for example, those companies that are willing to do joint PR with you, let you use their logo, participate in a case study, help you do a joint article, share a booth at a trade show, those companies probably have a more positive sentiment towards your company than those organizations that you service, that buy your product, who won't do those things. So you could be looking at different ways to create a measure of sentiment that could be tied to engagement, that could lead to referral rate, that drives customer footprint expansion, which improves customer value, and that goes right up the chain of what the C-suite would be interested in knowing how marketing is effective. That's just an example.
Yeah, I think when it comes, I think Laura and I are saying the same thing, that there's really two sets of metrics. You've got tactical metrics, which are the kinds of measurements that you should be looking at internally in your marketing department for how your campaigns, how your activities are performing. And you're holding yourself accountable to that, and the budget you've been given to go do those activities. But there's another set of tactics, of metrics that are strategic. And that's the harder part, is really identifying those strategic metrics which plug into the whole organization, just like Laura's talking about, and how marketing connects to it. That's the gap that's often missing.
Perhaps could be labeled the business intelligence. Is BI typically owned by marketing from your experience, or is the CIO owning the BI?
Well, I think that's something, again, when you say business intelligence, are you talking about the system? Like who owns putting the software in place, making sure the data all integrates, that, the data is coming from all the right sources? That might be related to the CIO. But if you're talking about the marketing metrics and initiate what it takes to do the appropriate measurement collection, the processes and skills associated with that to produce the dashboard, that belongs to marketing. I mean, that would be like saying the operations group or the customer service group, BI, belongs to the CIO, not to them. I mean, we would always, the sales reports would come from CIO as opposed to from the sales team.
Is marketing more ready to manage the BI indicators? In other words, not the data portion, not the operations, but in terms of what gets measured. Is marketing typically, in your experience, that is it more geared towards the construction of the right indicators, the dashboards about business performance, as opposed to just marketing performance?
Yes, that's the whole point. Marketing needs to be able to do that. I think that's why we're all here, is that good marketers, those that are best-in-class marketers, regardless of the size of company they're working in, should have that competency. Otherwise, I mean, they should be able to look at how they are having strategic impact to the business. Otherwise, to Ian's point, they're just working on stuff, and that's not really why we're being hired.
What about smaller to mid-sized companies? What you're describing makes perfect sense for a large corporation. They've got the resources, and it makes sense to put together those systems. But a growing organization is amorphous to begin with. They're chasing opportunities, so to speak.
Yeah. If I can just address, maybe it is for the larger organization, but I can relate a real life example about the question of where does BI live, who owns it. And I manage a marketing department for a multi-billion-dollar international company, and we had an internal analytics database BI team that lived within marketing. And it tremendously helped us drive our business and really understanding customer performance, segmentation, all the analytics, predictive modeling on how we're going to move forward. There was a decision made at some point in the company when it was for cost and streamlining that we were going to centralize this BI group, take it out of marketing and put it into an IT. Actually, it was a finance-related department. And all I can tell you is within a year, it moved back. Because the problem was they had the people and they had the technology, but they didn't understand the issues, the marketing issues that these questions need to be answered. They didn't understand how to do that. So it became disconnected from the business and not really that helpful. So I totally agree that BI ownership needs to be in marketing. It's key. Now for a smaller company, much more difficult. They don't have those kind of resources to do that kind of analysis, which means what often has to take the place is sales and marketing have to be really coordinated. And even in the smallest of companies, it's often a bigger challenge than you would expect. And what sometimes becomes part of the challenge is that even in the Chief Outsiders organization that I'm with, we conducted some research just a few months ago, surveyed of over 100 CEOs of small and mid-sized companies about marketing. And over half of these companies, 10 to 50 million in revenue, still have sales and marketing reporting into one function, a EVP, VP of sales and marketing, who comes from the sales side.
Let me ask you this question.
Exactly.
Let me ask you this question. From this discussion, if I may conclude, it sounds like that marketing has a pervasive role, which is fundamentally to put together a system of alignment of various functions so that business performance is improved. And marketing will provide certain tools to improve that performance, not all of them. Certainly sales is another one, operations is another one, finance is another one. But nevertheless, marketing has it seems to me that it should have the onus of putting together a system that creates the kind of alignment that is necessary to generate demand, and profitably so. That's what it seems to me that you're saying.
Sure, you edit out and make all that back and forth and let the babies out the door. But in answer to your question, first of all, I don't think that what Ian and I are talking about cannot be done by small to medium-sized companies. I think we're selling those people short if we say that this isn't something they can do. I do think they can do it. In fact, in some cases, I think they actually can do it better because they have fewer systems that they have to manage. They usually have their data closer to them. So I find that when we work with the smaller to medium-sized companies, we can actually do a better job of getting a handle on the metrics and improving the alignment and getting the whole roadmap things addressed far better than we can in some of the bigger companies where everything is more spread out and there's more, challenges when it comes to data and systems. To Ian's point, I also want to say that it is not uncommon, and certainly in early stage companies, to be very sales-centric. They might start off as product-centric and then they become very sales-centric. And that as they mature, and as the marketing organization can really play a strategic role, they will become more customer-centric. And that's really an important role for marketing, and that's when we really become partners in the process. So to your initial question of where we were headed marketing has to have some initiative. And the biggest thing I think that many marketers don't do is feel like they are empowered over their destiny, and they have to take initiative. They have to take that power. Otherwise, somebody else will take it and run with it. So really, just sitting back and thinking it's going to come to you is not the answer. They have to take some of that.
Now, do you think the CEO needs to take ownership of this, especially in smaller organizations or growing organizations where CEO says that, it's critical that we create these systems, measurements, metrics for improving business performance, and that CEO's involvement is necessary to drive those metrics correctly, and perhaps the CMO will be placed in charge of doing that, but the CEO needs to be involved. Is that something that you've seen?
Well, I think the CEO plays a critical role, and she certainly needs to be a champion and be willing to support the effort, financially support it, organizationally support it, facilitate the appropriate internal dynamics to enable it. In many small to medium-sized companies, there really isn't a CMO. There might be a VP of marketing. It takes sometimes a little larger organization before there's actually a CMO. And so but it should be the CEO placing out the framework, and it should be the marketing organization that should bring some value to the conversation and say, tell us what needles you're expecting us to move. How far are you expecting us to move them? How will you know that we've made a difference? And then they should be able to go back and say, okay, here's the needles we're expected to move. Here's how our success is going to be measured, how our contribution is going to be measured. Now, let's be sure we put the right things in place to demonstrate that we have the right strategies, programs, and activities to make that happen. And then let's show that we are making that happen.
And Ian, in your experience, do you see that in the larger organizations, the disconnect between CMO and CEO is greater than smaller organizations?
No, I don't think it's greater in the larger organization. I think the challenge to the mid and the small size is that even for those CEOs that do have the vision, they do have the vision of where marketing really needs to play and how it needs to strategically drive the company. The problem is by just them telling the troops, we need to be strategic. Well, often the staff that they have, which got them to this stage of their development, may not be the same kinds of leaders that are strategic leaders. They oftentimes are folks who have been fantastic at opportunistically leading the company, getting things done, and making it happen on a day-to-day basis. To tell those people now, be strategic. And sometimes that skill is just not there. That's exactly part of the reason why Chief Outsiders is succeeding with these kinds of companies, is that that CEO may not want to go outside his organization and hire a brand new CMO, but he may need to tap into somebody as a part-time CMO to kind of help bring his people along, because all the systems and data in the world doesn't change the fact that business is people, and you got to have the right people to carry that out.
I agree. You have to have and sometimes you have to augment your current staff with firms like ours. And our goal should be to teach those people, if that's what the CEO wants to do, is hold on to the people who help them get there. Get them to teach them how to fish, right? So help them become better strategists, help them do better at all the other marketing functions, the product marketing, the strategic marketing components, and looking at customer marketing beyond just maybe what they were doing initially tactically, even to begin to be more strategic in the way they go to market. So where they were opportunistic tactically from demand gen, how do you become more strategic in terms of segmentation, targeting, those, persona development, use case development, playbook development, those kinds of things that maybe those in the early days weren't as essential to success for whatever reason.
So in that sense, the CMO or the VP of marketing should really take on the baton and say that the disconnect between the CMO and the CEO needs to be reduced somehow, that they need to work towards involving the CEO in this process, because the CMO alone cannot push this agenda.
Well, I'd like to think that the CEO is already in the camp of wanting to enable the marketing organization to be successful, because if marketing is successful and sales is successful and the product team is successful and the customer service team is successful, all those teams are firing on all pistons, the company will have a better chance of achieving its target of outcomes. So it's in the CEO and the COO and the CFO's best interest to want to make this partnership, to want to be partners in the process. So it's not so much that the CMO and the CEO, who comes first, as long as to the dance, as long as they both come prepared to be partners in the journey.